if you've been around DPPOU at some point over the past couple of years, you have probably seen this team in action. Or at the very least, you have probably seen a team that looks very much like this in action. So this original team was built by Jirachee with 2 E's. And it's a great team. It's still, even though it's several years old at this point, I still believe that it is very well suited to the current metagame. Maybe you can tweak a couple things, but it was actually used in a high-level setting not too long ago, a testament to that. So, yeah, you've probably seen this kind of thing around. That's why I'm making this video, because I don't know why this Heatran sprite isn't working anymore, by the way. But you have the image of the Heatran that leads the team off right here, so there you go. Anyway, so I'm making this video not just because I think this team is still great and is still well-suited to the current metagame, maybe with a tweak or two, but even if you don't think that, I believe that this team has had quite an impact on the metagame, and its influence has been felt and is continuously seen today in high-level tournament play. So you may have also seen this kind of team in the DPP sample teams thread. This Zapdos Blissey balance by August is actually, it grew out of a direct update or edit or variation of Jirachee's original team. And in the recent DPP Invitational, then Crystal uses pretty much the exact team. I mean, it's different because the Jirachee set is different, and Zapdos has U-turn. But other than that, and the Heatran has Eruption, which is funny. But other than that, it is basically the same. It's which is a testament to how fundamentally solid the team is against the metagame at its core. So, yeah, this team is not completely without precedent, but I believe that it's being built kind of refined the style into a more defined shape and had a great deal of impact on the metagame and influenced a lot of people wanting to make the most out of that style, which is why we see so much more of it now than we used to. Because before this team came along, the style was a relative rarity. So the earliest example I can think of this kind of Specs Heatran Blissey balance type thing, there might be one that I'm forgetting from when DPP was current gen. I'm not sure if I'm just imagining that or not, but when I just ask myself immediately, the first thing that comes to mind, there was a user in Pokemon Online named Harry, who had a team with Specs Heatran and Blissey and Breloom. And it was a little different. His team didn't have Zapdos, didn't have Starmie. It had Rotom, I think, and a sub-variant of Jirachee. But that was an early example of this kind of thing. And then, a few years later, in 2013, I believe, then TV Raka, a.k.a. Parengon, he had a team. It didn't have Specs Heatran, but it was this example of this bulky offense, balanced Blissey kind of thing. Because, and DPP was the current gen, Blissey was pretty much exclusively associated with stall teams, just like pure defense. And even the more aggressive teams Blissey was used on were still very, very passive damage heavy, spamming spikes. So even if you use like fast Blissey with Flamethrower to catch Scizor or whatever, it was still a very, very bulky team with Skarmory and the like. So there were a few rare exceptions, but they weren't really the metagame. So TV Raka's team was another example because it didn't have Specs Heatran, but it did have really, really hard hitters. It had CB Dragonite and Flygon, and then Starmie, and then Scarf Jirachee, and I forget what the last is. Maybe it was Specs Heatran? I don't think so. I'm not 100% certain. I don't think it was Breloom, though, so might have been Zapdos. Anyway, point being, all those Pokemon I just mentioned could have feasibly gone in that last slot, which is a testament to this style of team's flexibility, and a big part of that is Blissey. But we'll get to why Blissey is used there even after the explosion of Clefable. So, yeah, that team 2013. And then in 2016, I'm sorry to bring myself into this. Actually, no, not before myself. Then there were a couple players, Smurf and I think TV Raka again. They were using these like Aerodactyl, Azelf lead offenses that then slammed a Blissey into it because these teams would just get ripped apart by Randance Kingdra or Scarf Flygon, or even something like Offensive Suicune would be such a pain. And Blissey is such a good catch-all that it was able to do that. Oh, but wait, wouldn't Blissey, slow these teams down? I mean, yes, that is somewhat of a risk, but they were using these aggressive T-Wave flamethrower sets, which would just slow the opponent down for the benefit of their own Dragonite or whatever. And it would not really concede turns to defense in the way that would be exploitable, i.e. it wouldn't give them free spikes because of the strong flamethrower for Skarmory. So that was another idea. And then I had a team that I was experimenting with in 2016 in the fall, and I forget the exact details, and it went through several variations, but it was, again, like D-Knight, Blissey, Starmie, Jirachee, Specs Heatran in the lead. And then the last slot was Machamp. And then eventually I changed it to Breloom. So, these kinds of things were, flying around a lot. But, then Jirachee's team came around in early 2017. We actually have a replay from it. So, now that we have demonstrated this team's use in more recent times, it winds up winning this battle, by the by, because, look, Specs Heatran just keeps coming in again and again and again, and then Breloom pressures again and again, so you're already kind of seeing the core of the team in action. It's going to get up rocks, because Blissey is a great rocker, and then you have your defensive core against offensive threats between Jirachee, Zapdos, Breloom, Blissey, Starmie. Everything is useful defensively in some way, and then you kind of slow the game to a controlled pace so you can get your big hitters in. And different variants of this team are going to function largely the same. Whether you got a CB Knight, that's not really going to change much, or whether you've got a Metagross over Jirachee, I mean, same idea. And I think the biggest impact this team has is that nowadays the most common place you see Blissey is on paralysis spam teams, and that was not always a standard. Blissey was not always used on that, and I really think this team had a lot to do with Blissey being used there. Because now that you see the same ideas, you've got the Zapdos, Jirachee, Blissey, Starmie thing, then the Breloom, and then in that Heatran slot, you chuck in Machamps. People are using the dual fighters with the paralysis. They're like, oh, Heatran's cool and all, but what if I also had Machamp? It helps out against T-Tar and Blissey, or Clef rather, and it's good. Again, there's so much variation. You could throw CBD Knight there, you could throw Machamp there, but yeah, that is what I'm attributing this team to, or attributing this team's impact to, having a big influence on the pair spam teams we've been seeing a lot over the past few years because of how hard they anchor on Blissey. And it is this team's anchoring on Blissey that defines it. Because yes, you could run this set of 6 Pokemon with a Tyranitar over Blissey. That was done a million times, and it's a great team, but it's not the same thing at all. So, let's get into the team. How much longer does this game go? Do we see it through to the conclusion? Yeah, Heatran just destroying. But yeah, I think, so 90 turns, forfeit. But yeah, great team. Anyway, so we will now go, before we go to the replays and dissect everything we just mentioned, we will now go through the team itself. Now, of course, I'm sure Jirachee would be the first to tell you this. There's obviously there are obviously many possible variations on the EVs, the natures, the movesets. I mean, depending, obviously, but not everything is set in stone, so you can change it to your preference. And I myself, if I were to use this team, I was actually a big fan of the Scarf Metagross version of this team for quite a long time. So I have a lot of first-hand experience with it. Not just the team that I made before, but then actually using Jirachee's team. Oh, with Scarf Metagross, oh, that's great. And then I did other things like Sub Zapdos, which are not here. But, that's the whole idea, that you can mix and match to your desire. So, Heatran with the Specs lead is great because bulky leads, offensive leads, it just kind of cuts through most of what you're going to be facing on turn 1. Non-sash Azelfs just get dropped. You've got the ability to dumpster Metagrosses and Machamps that aren't running sash. And even if they are running sash, I mean, that's not great, obviously, but it could be a lot worse, because the biggest thing you fear against those kinds of teams is like falling on the back foot against them and letting them just run over you and dictate the pressure, and then you can't come back. So against very heavily offensive teams that these Machamps and Metagrosses are leading off against, then it is better to just bring them down to 1 HP and then be done with the threat, rather than fall behind and let them, mess up your Zapdos or Starmie or something. Because Heatran is the least... I mean, Heatran is a great defensive Pokemon, don't get me wrong, but Specs Heatran is the least useful Pokemon defensively of this 6. And if you're going to be facing a lot of fast-paced offensive team with lots of close combats and Hydro Pumps and Earthquakes, then, yeah, Heatran is the most expendable, so you may as well get the most out of it on that turn 1. So... and it's great against bulky stuff, obviously. It's not just great on turn 1, of course. It is the lead. It's a great turn 1 Pokemon. But it's not... And you face a Jirachee lead, and you just, salivate as you relish the Specs Overheat you're about to launch. But you're also great mid-game. That's the whole idea. It's a good lead, but it's not an Azelf type thing, where if you get mid-game use out of it, you'd kind of be surprised. And... with Spextran, the whole goal is against a more moderately paced team, you will get it in over and over, and walling Specs Heatran is very, very difficult. So, the main thing I prefer on this kind of thing, Jirachee is a speed guy, so he likes timid, and it is important, sometimes. But on Modest Heatran, or on Specs Heatran, I really like Modest. The power is just absurd. And the other thing I really like is Dragon Pulse. And I think this one is more important now, because when this team was built, Latias had not yet been reintroduced into the tier. So it wasn't as necessary. Now, Dragon Pulse on Specs Heatran in the lead slot is still very useful for when you face Dragonite leads. But it's with the Latias, return of Latias to the metagame, Latias is anchoring a lot of balance teams, a lot of stall teams. And you want to be able to threaten it with your Specs Heatran. Otherwise, yeah, Overheat is strong, but you don't have Pursuit or anything here. So you will need some way to force your way by it if you want to make progress against this kind of team, which you need to, because this is what Heatran is for. So I think in the Latias metagame, you definitely want Dragon Pulse, especially because one of your other wall breakers is Breloom. So, yeah, but it's tough to know what to drop, because Overheat is important. Earth Power, HP Grass, Flamethrower. You don't really like losing Flamethrower, but I don't know. And HP Grass is great because obviously OHKOing Swampert is wonderful. So again, this is preference. But yeah, the Heatran is strong enough to threaten the... Jirachee mentions the tilt leads, and those are things like Machamp, Metagross, Dragonite. The one you don't need to necessarily sacrifice Heatran against... not that you're sacrificing it against them necessarily, but if you do. But against Empoleon, which is similarly threatening, you just go to Blissey. So, that's Heatran for you. Simple. Yeah. Now, Zapdos. Bold Zapdos. Broken Zapdos. This thing is so unkillable. I mean, Jirachee's got 3 attacks here. I personally enjoyed a substitute variant, just because Subaru Zapdos is a miracle worker. And it will pull out all sorts of stupid games for you. But, I mean, it really... And I also run Discharge, and Jirachee got on my case for it a lot. But, I mean, in fairness, Discharge is more important with sub, because you're trying to create opportunities for yourself to sub. Without it, I also agree, yes, T-Bolt. Now, if you're running a Paraspam, or you're really leaning into the Paraspam angle, then I can understand it more. But some people just go flat-out T-Wave there, so, again... to mix and match. Your preferences are important here. But yeah, T-Bolt HPA. So the thing about Bold Zapdos is here it is responsible for handling fighters because it takes them on incredibly well. Now, a lot of people, I think, will kind of shy away from this kind of team because Starmie will not always be able to keep rocks off. And they kind of shut down as soon as they see a Stealth Rock weak Pokemon taking Stealth Rock. I mean, one that's not supposed to just hit hard and immediately. You know, like a CB Gyarados or a DD Dragonite or whatever. Those can take rocks damage and still be functional. But because they're supposed to be aggressive, their health is not as important. Especially because they're more vulnerable to being revenge killed by virtue of their lack of bulk. But with Bold Zapdos, it's not quite the same thing. I mean, obviously you don't want to get double switched on with rocks a million times, and that's where this team... I mean, you have to use it well to get the most out of it, like with any team. But that's where this team kind of shines, because you've got the explosive power of Heatran, and then you've got, you know, Bold Zapdos, which is one of the most difficult to KO Pokemon in the tier. Like, you'll see a lot of utility T-Tars not running Stone Edge, and usually it's fine, right? You don't really need Stone Edge for Gera, for D-Knight, and Zapdos, you just crunch your way through. Generally, it's fine. You'll deal with the Stealth Rock weakness. And that's the thing with Bold Zapdos. Like, even if you have rocks, once it gets that roost off, a lot of teams are just like, oh, I actually cannot KO this at all. And it's so nasty against a lot of offense. Even in the Latias metagame, Latias is not, or offensive Latias is definitely not a confident Zapdos switch, especially if you have Discharge. Also in the Latias metagame, I would advise 24 Spadef EVs, which, if my memory serves, is the benchmark to survive Specs Draco from full 100% of the time. Anyway, so yeah, it is, even with this defensive set, Zapdos naturally is hitting hard, and it's so tanky, which makes it harder to deal with, because you've got, you have less opportunity to out-offense it. Like, Scarflygon is already not great into into offensive Zapdos, but against defensive is just a joke. So, yeah, against offense, this thing is huge, and pairs beautifully with Blissey, because, oh, well, don't you need Zapdos to outspeed offensive Suicune? No, you do not, because of Blissey. So, and I will just let this opening line say, Blissey, despite being, bulky, it allows you to play extremely aggressively. So Blissey has a million setup opportunities per turn because it's so, per game, because it's so bulky. Now, Clef is great, but the reason it doesn't work on this team is that this team is not focusing on, it's not fast-paced enough to focus on just, take hits decently, pivot around. That would be the T-Tar angle, where you're hitting hard with everything. You would run a more offensive Zapdos, for example. With that kind of team, you don't need to take the hits as perfectly. But this team is also not fully stall, whereas with Clef, yes, you withstand something like, Specs Kingdra less. You don't take those Hydro Pumps and Draco Meteors nearly as well, but it's fine because you are pressuring the opponent not with hard hits, but with more passive damage. And Sand and Spikes are also a very fast-ticking timer, so they don't have as much time to break through you, so it's fine if you don't wall those attacks as well. Now, with a balanced team like this, you always, there are plenty of good balanced teams, but a lot of them will struggle against these really hard hitters, and Blissey just kind of shuts them down really, really easily. So that is kind of the joy of Bliss on this team and on those Paraspam teams. That is also why I mentioned Blissey being used on those Paraspam teams being results of this team, because a lot of those Paraspam teams, they're great, Process is annoying, they kind of get really torn apart by all these hard-hitting special attackers. Blissey, simple as, but this team really demonstrated the effectiveness of that. Even something as Zapdos, which pre-Latias was considered semi-broken by many players, including myself. And, Blissey is just so brutal into it. So, yeah, Rocks, T-Wave, Seismic Toss. Another thing is that Blissey is a great rocker, not just because it gets opportunity, but because it completely destroys Starmie. If Starmie is your Rapid Spinner into Blissey, you will not keep Rocks off. And that was a really big deal at the time of this team. And even now, you like having a rocker that can deal with Starmie. Starmie's not the top 3 Pokemon it used to be, where it was all over the place in usage. But even now, you don't want to be completely up the creek against it. So, Blissey gets rocks over and over, million turns per game. And also spreads paralysis to help out your Specs Heatran and your Breloom. So, yeah, that's basically it. Just Blissey comes in early on against a million things, gets up rocks, simple. Part of the defensive core. Blissey, Zapdos are beautiful together. And Breloom as well. So, Breloom's bulk here because you don't need the speed because it's a more moderately paced team. And you really like the bulk. I also personally like max attack, but hey, that's me, because I think Breloom gets plenty of bulk with just max HP. But, yeah, and I really like the extra power on Super Power. But this team can run Focus Punch, it can run a million things on Breloom. It can run Swords Dance if you want it. Those Paraspam teams, they're like, I don't even want to bother with Spore because I'm just T-waving everything. So I'll just Swords Dance instead. And it's a great option, of course. So you have all the options in the world. But the core idea is that Breloom is going to switch into things like Tyranitar, and opposing Clefable, and it is going to put things to sleep. And then, I mean, look, when you sleep an opposing Pokemon and you create an opportunity for Specs Heatran to switch in, then good night. That's terrifying. To say nothing of how scary Breloom is itself. So, it's pretty simple in this regard. Mach Punch Revenge kills everything. Mach Punch plus the Scarf Jirachee that's here. You're covering setup sweepers. In addition to the bulky Zapdos and the Blissey. And it's also an offensive threat on its own. Great wall breaker. Kind of simple in that regard, which is nice. So, here's from Jirachee's thread here. Pretty important for Breloom to show up here because otherwise slow walls that are tough to wear down will outlast you, and yes, that's big. And through Heatran and Breloom, you can force them into a much more fast-paced game, which this team thrives in. So, also, Jirachee advises to be patient with Spore, which, yes, is very big. Spore is Breloom's biggest threat. If you can avoid popping it right off the bat, then you will be able to threaten the opponent more thoroughly over the course of the game because they still know you had that Spore against them. And Breloom's so scary even without Spore that, when you first get it in, just attack. And any attempt to switch in like a Lumberry Pokemon or like a Sleep Talker that would absorb the Spore, then that gets turned on its head, and you will get Breloom in later on. So that's the beauty of this team, where you are good offensively and defensively with your Pokemon. And even Blissey is an offensive threat against offensive teams because they're not going to have the longevity for simply Seismic Toss. Starmie, simple, bulky Starmie. This one actually has a lot of special attack EVs. Which, because 156 HP used to be used alongside defense to always survive something from Gyarados at a certain range. But here they are, since the Starmie doesn't have Thunderbolt, they're chucking a special attack, which is actually kind of cool because you have the bulk on Starmie, so you can withstand hits and make use of recover, but you also actually hit pretty hard for a balanced team, especially with your access to Ice Beam, which a lot of people are not going to be expecting on this kind of team. Now, even if the team is known that it's not going to really lose utility, because, you are still going to be able to switch it in and threaten out Breloom, Mixed Dragonite, or Flygon. Latios now, Zapdos, all sorts of situations where that comes in use. And also, you don't have to run Ice Beam. You can run Psychic or Thunderbolt or Thunder Wave, whatever you want, and different EVs, of course. So, yeah, you can just chuck as many as 4 paralysis moves here. Zapdos, Blissey, Breloom, if you're running Stun Spore, and or you just abuse the paralysis with Breloom, and Starmie, and then the last, obviously, is Jirachee. But, yeah, so that's why it's so easy to take this in a more directly paracentric angle. But, I mean, Blissey gets the job done itself pretty nicely. So, yeah. The big thing here is with that whole Zapdos thing, what about rocks? You have to be patient around the rocks and keep your game plan going without necessarily having to play with rocks off at all times. Later in the game, yes, Starmie will be able to do that, because Starmie is much, much, much more effective once everything's been damaged, and then it comes out and it's so fast, it's so hard to stop from doing its thing, and at that point, you have what you need, and then you get those rocks off later in the game, your Zapdos gets the roost off, and you are sitting pretty. But you really can't just rush into it, and because then you will lose your Starmie, and then you'll really get overwhelmed. So, I remember when Starmie was so popular at some point in the metagame, people were literally switching their Starmies into each other and sacrificing them on turn 5 and 6, because they would live a T-Bolt. So they would do this just to get rocks off the field for like 2 turns before the rocker would come back and set them up again. And it was just, people were terrified of playing with rocks on their side of the field. Before it wasn't so big, and then people discovered how good Starmie was, and they discovered how nice it was to not have to deal with rocks, and then they were like, and then they kind of became addicted to it and couldn't play with rocks up anymore. They're like, what do I do? So that was funny. So yeah, you don't want to be doing that. And then, of course, Scarf Jirachee, which checks offense and maintains the threat of your offensive Pokemon yourself because it has U-turn. So, Ice Punch for Dragonite, Thunder Punch for Gyarados. Yeah, simple. Obviously, there's a million variants here. You can run Trick, Fire Punch, Thunder Wave, Healing Wish if you want. You can do whatever you like. And a big variant of this that I liked was, instead of Scarf Jirachee, Scarf Metagross, which I loved because of Trick and Explosion. and it just had the bulk and the power, and the forcefulness to really make a lot of things happen. So it made this team even more aggressive, and I didn't personally miss the extra speed. So yeah, a lot of options in this slot. But then again, I think great teams in general have a lot of flexibility depending on your preference. So yeah, I personally really, really enjoyed, modest specs Heatran, sub Zapdos, and max attack Breloom. And I think the Starmie set was a little different, but I don't remember exactly. That's not really as important. And I like Scarf Metagross. So yeah, that was basically it. Okay, so that's the team. And now we will move on to the replay of this team in action, and I will adjust the dimensions for this one. So this is from Jirachee is the player in this game. His name in the battle is Schoolboy P. And his opponent, Babidi1998, also known as Heist, also known as the Grand Babito, is one of the best DPP players ever. And this was for a tournament. This was for round 4 or 5. Actually, I think it was a pretty late round, actually. But yeah, this is a pretty late round in DPP Cup. So both players are taking it very seriously. And this was the deciding game 3. Now, we're not going to go into it's a pretty lengthy game, so we're not going to go into a super detailed turn-by-turn analysis. But we are going to... Let's just see that again. We are just going to go through it. Overheating into the Blissey, doing 40%. My God. From a timid Heatran, by the way. Yeah. So, Heist actually has his own Blissey here. Blissey's rocking into each other. And now, Breloom coming in, sporing Fortress. That's big. And the Rockstrup, just, because, again, in this early game scenario, you think, oh, that superpower bounced off the Fortress. And remember, it's not about the immediate early game. I mean, yeah, it's getting weaker with each hit, but you're just trying to chip the Fori and wear it down. So, eventually, that will pay off later on. So, Blissey coming in here, and again, we're getting roared out, but it's not really weakened, it's not really terrible in this offensive matchup, or in this matchup against a very stallish team. So now I've got this Zapdos one-on-one going. It's two very defensive Zapdoses, and they're a lucky crit on the Roar. And Zapdos is out of range with Rocks up, but it'll be tough to find a roost unless he could roost on Blissey. That's the biggest thing. But yeah, then he gets finished off by Ice Beam, which, okay, sure. Hydro would have done it there too, but now the Scarf T-Tar finishes off the Starmie, and now the hazards are up permanently. But the Zapdos going down means Breloom is a terror. So, yeah, and in comes Dugtrio, which is going to get Mach Punched at -1, surviving decently, but it will Aerial Ace and finish that. You see how this is more of a gradual thing as opposed to any sort of direct attempt at, one Pokemon wall breaking through everything. It's more of a team effort. So the Jirachee gets the free U-turn on the Dugtrio, and now it comes Zapdos against the Sleeping Fortress. Comes in again against the Sleeping Fortress. And a double to Jirachee on the Blissey, threatening with the Scarf Iron Head. Threatening with the Scarf Iron Head against this Blissey in Sand. And the Blissey reveals Protect, which is unusual for a Blissey in general, but yeah, now Heatran comes in on Fori. Something's gonna drop. Whether it's the Fori or no, the Dugtrio gets sacked actually, and that just means Heatran can come in again later. But it's either that or Fori or Blissey goes down, because Blissey cannot come in at full or at under half into Specs Flamethrower like that. So even against a Blissey, even against Blissey, Scarf T-Tar, and Dugtrio, Heatran remains not just viable but threatening. So, God, Specs Heatran, what a Pokemon. So yeah, now Jirachee's doing Jirachee things. But now the Rapid Spin goes off. But it's not the worst thing in the world, because Blissey is just going to pop him back up. And actually, it's not on that turn, it's not even going to get the rocks back up. It's going to heal, because this team can take its sweet time. So, yeah, this Celebi comes in as the last, which this was a known team Heist was using. But he goes for the T-Wave, nails Fori, Sorry, skip turn goes a little fast sometimes. Nails the 4E, and it's going to get worn down anyway. So, like, it full paras on this subsequent protect, but, I mean, it wasn't going to be lasting anyway, so... Yeah, now the rocks will go up, and now it's just a very long stall war. Celebi leeches, Blissey rocks, and, yeah, Zapdos is pressure here, as it even gets U-turned on, but the Blissey comes in, and with Protect and Wish, that it's going to have Seismic Toss last, so it's not going to stall it out. Its Roost will just burn through the S-tosses, and then it won't have S-tosses to actually hurt the rest of the Pokemon. And as much as PP as Blissey has, it's not going to be able to stall out everything. You know, because it's going to be losing its wishes too, because Zapdos can just kind of perform these miracles. Broken Zapdos. So we're going to skip through this little stall war here. As Celebi comes in. Gets Wished to, actually. Leech Seed, but again, pressure. Can't do this forever. And another Leech Seed. Nice stay in there. Burning the third and fourth Leech Seed, actually, because of pressure. But, yeah, now Leech again. Psychic. I think this is going to force a switch. But, yeah, the thing is that Blissey is going to heal no matter what. So, it's just a matter of outstalling things at this point. And we're just going to skip through it because this is going to be a long one. Oh, here comes the Specs Heatran getting U-turned on. I mean, it wasn't going to break Blissey from that high range anyway, but... Yeah, Blissey coming in risklessly to heal. Yeah, and this is why Blissey is so good here, as opposed to Clef. Well, you'll see it in the next game, actually. But, yeah, Blissey anchors this team in a way Clef couldn't because it takes the hits so well. And obviously, against a passive team like this, then it doesn't have to... it wouldn't have to take passive damage, so it's more threatening in that regard. But as a more general thing, this kind of team is really anchored by how freely it switches into things. Into more offensive things like Zapdos, Suicune, Empoleon, Heatran. So... Yeah, and it takes a Hydro... Here's an example. Clefable takes Empoleon Hydro Pump, and it has to Soft Boiled. Blissey takes, like, 4 Empoleon Hydro Pumps and can still use Stealth Rock. It's just ridiculous. You know, you can counter offensive Suicune with Blissey that's under half health. You can switch the half health Blissey into the offensive Suicune and still counter it easily. Clefable, no. So the flexibility is amazing, both in the team builder and in the battle. Yeah, and now the Celebi goes down, but it was just a matter of time. So how does this team stack up against a more offensive matchup? Well, this is a battle between Blue Wind, Bernie-chan, and Liberty 32, aka Roscoe, who was a teammate of mine and Jirachee's in SPL 9. And this is a battle from SPL 9 semifinals. So that previous battle was May 2017. This battle is March 2018. So Jirachee was like, dude, just use my team. It'll be great. And we thought about it. We agreed. So Roscoe leads off with the Heatran, and there's the Machamp. Just goes right for the overheat as planned, because if Machamp goes down to Sash, then it goes down to Sash. Fine. But a lot of Machamps don't run Sash anymore. They like Custat Berry. So in comes T-Tar and takes 36 from Overheat. Good lord. Specially defense boosted T-Tar, by the way. So, Jirachee coming in. And so this is a more fast-paced team, but that's... so you think, oh, well, you like that more moderate pace? Okay, well, if you want a faster-paced game, then in comes Jirachee into T-Tar, scares it out, and U-turn. And U-turn means another Heatran switch. So even Specs Heatran against this offensive team, lots of super effective attacks aimed at it, no problem, still getting the opportunities. And it overheats and it crits, which is, very lucky, of course, into the D-Knight. But that overheat was still doing 1,000,000 damage. This Heatran is absurd. So, in comes Machamp, -2. Bold Zapdos coming in with Sand Up, which, not great for Zapdos. I mean, Zapdos, it's fine either way, relatively. You got to be careful, of course. But if there's no sand, Zapdos is a lot harder to take out. And if there is sand, then the Machamp is not healing. I mean, even if it's a lefty's Machamp, it's not healing off damage. So there's the pivot into Stone Edge against the confused Zapdos. And it's just going to go for Iron Head just to wear it down. And Jirachee gets taken out, but that's fine because now it's in range for, like, everything. So, worthy sacrifice, especially with the full health Bronzong, meaning it's not as necessary. That move probably should have been Overheat, I think, because no guard against Machamp, it would have hit T-Tar a lot harder. And now Bluin makes a great play and goes for Fire Blast as Breloom switches in. But here we see the benefits of having a very bulky Breloom in that it lives Fire Blast and 2 turns of Sand after, because it didn't have Toxic Orb activated. So that's just a thing of beauty. And now it will not get KO'd by Sand, because Toxic Orb is active. And it Mach Punches and finishes the T-Tar off, because nothing really wants to switch into it. So Jirachee comes in, Psychic reveals Super Rachi, Offensive Calm Mind. And so rather than risk the HP ground, because you go to Heatran, because you think, oh, physical. Oh, never mind, it's special. Now Blissey comes in, and notice how... I'm not saying that Clefable wouldn't be good here too, but notice how completely immune to getting crit by Jirachee or Starmie this Blissey is, as opposed to Clef. I mean, look at that. That crit Hydro. I actually forgot that Hydro crit. It crits Hydro for 33. You know, it could do that twice more and still, if it was the same roll, obviously. It could do that twice more and still not KO the Blissey. You know, even though it's going to soft boil soon, but still. So, yeah, just gets a size, but also very, very resilient here. And, yeah, Starmie will just not outlast it here. And there are rocks, late game rocks, Starmie into Bronzong. So, whatever pace you want to play at, this team can do it. Bronzong's going to slow the game down, try to get up some rocks. That's fine. Starmie will sit on it, recover, spin, all that. So, their Hydro wear the Zong down a little bit. But yeah, you see how Heatran, Zapdos, Blissey, Breloom, Starmie, they just have control of the game against this more offensive team. So, spin into Jirachee. And is it a Lump Jirachee? Or, no, it's not a Lump Jirachee. That wasn't used then on Calm Mind. It was Lefty. It's going to be Lefties or Shuka that was used on Super Rachi. But yeah, now we have this Starmie, Blissey one-on-one again. And Recover does not have enough to PP stall Seismic Toss. So... yeah, eventually, this is it. Oh, the Starmie doesn't even have leftovers, but even if it did have leftovers, then still. Anyway, Bronzong coming in, and not risking getting boomed on. Let the Starmie go. Heatran, Starmie, nice double to Machamp by Bluin there, and it doesn't even matter at this point because Breloom is going to... so he's Stone into the Zapdos on the switch, and the Custap is just screaming out right now, but it doesn't even matter because the Machamp is also getting worn down by Sand, and now it's just going to get finished off, because now nothing can switch in, and now Overheat is used, and that Starmie was not living that Overheat, even with that crit. So, yeah, it was just a trading game, and now it's just a matter of, okay, well, you kill something with Machamp, and then Heatran will come back in and kill something else, and then the game will be won, so... so now Super Rachi, which with power could force its way through Clef. And on this kind of team, Clef would not be able to afford Thunder Wave because that knockoff is so much better. So it's lower bulk. And if you're running a knockoff-less Clefable here, then what are you doing? So see, look, that +2 Psychic just crit the Blissey. And +2 Psychic crit the Blissey, and it did, what, 61%? Yeah, 61% from a +2 Psychic. Yeah. So, Blissey is just going to ride this one out beautifully. Even with crits, even with drops, it's just going to get it done. And at this point, you just want to get everything in range. I mean, Heatran wins, Breloom wins, it's fine. So, just sacrificing the Blissey, and that's the game. So, yeah, that was a demonstration of how this team performed in high-level matchups. And its variations were, you know, really, really great as well. So that is what this team is good at and what kind of impact it's had on the metagame. And yeah, so thank you for watching. I hope you have enjoyed. Thank you to Jirachee for digging up the replay, because I remember that DPP Cup series he had against Heist, but I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to find the replays. And he dug them up, and he gave me some notes on the team. And yeah, so if you have any questions about the team or variants, or you know how to update it for the modern age, then feel free to leave them in the comments. But Yeah, I still, really enjoyed the Scarf Metagross, the Sub Zapdos, because Sub Zapdos is just so unfair against offense. I didn't even make it fast. Sub Zapdos is traditionally faster, but I like the bold version. Just did incredible things. So thank you. I'll see you in the next one.